What's up, 3DMJers? I am joined by Coach Brad Loomis and the Team 3DMJ mental health specialist, Amanda Rizzo, licensed clinical counselor, licensed professional clinical counselor,
Yes.
LPCC?
LPCC.
LPCC, with the emphasis on the P.
A
All right.
P.
She's a pro. We're pro bodybuilders. You're a professional clinical counselor, folks. And we got a good topic for all you coaches out there today. We're going to be talking about managing client expectations. And I think coaches know what I'm talking about here. You know, when you have an athlete come to you, they may or may not be experienced. So often what happens is novice people or first timers, they're super passionate. They want to get into a new endeavor, whether that's powerlifting, whether that's bodybuilding, or whether that's just recreationally lifting weights. And they don't necessarily know what their potential is, which is a really exciting time. I remember just falling in love with the dreams of where I would go one day in lifting. So it's this very powerful state that your clients come to you in when they're new. And it is a delicate balancing act to both nurture that, encourage that, use that as fuel, but also to help make sure that you set them up for success so that they're not, actually in some kind of delusional state. So I thought it'd be really cool to have this discussion with you, Amanda, because I know this is something that you deal with as a therapist, that sometimes people's worldviews or views of themselves in relation to their world are a few steps removed from reality, and that can cause them a lot of problems in their lives. So I know that you have the tools to deal with this outside of the bodybuilding context, and I know Brad and myself we have had our own struggles that have sometimes led to our own not just the stress of our clients when they find that their realities and expectations are on two different pages, but occasionally if you don't handle this well, or sometimes even if you do your best to handle it well, the person who can end up getting that pain, that stress in the form of resentment can be the coach. So hopefully we can have a discussion here about what we have and haven't learned, things we have and haven't done right over the years, to help other coaches avoid some of that pain and find that right delicate balance. So I think where I'd like to start is with you, Amanda. I'd love to hear your thoughts from a clinical perspective of how do you address, let's say you have your first session with a patient, and it becomes apparent to you that maybe within a host of other issues they're dealing with or that they've come to you for, among them is that their perception doesn't really match yours and what you think is probably closer to objective reality. What is step one there? How do you address that?
Yeah, excellent question. One of the first things I would ask is, how did they come to this conclusion? And I want to get a better understanding about their perception, their actual perception, and maybe some evidence around what led them to believe that this is a realistic expectation, something that could be attained within a reasonable amount of time, because we have limited amount of time in terms of therapy sessions. We don't want the client to continue with us for years on end. So I would ask more clarifying questions around why they would want this, and how they ended up with that conclusion. And then I would start saying what I perceive to be something a little bit more realistic, and sometimes I won't do that as bluntly. I can start formulating answers around, okay, so this is what we can work on right now, and then we could follow up once we reach this goal. So I kind of chop it up in smaller pieces and have them experience the actual process, whatever that might be. And so that can help fine tune that expectation a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're asking with a genuine curiosity there. You're not trying to get in that kind of gotcha scenario where it's well, how do you come to this belief of X, Y, and Z?
Right.
And then, you're trying to dig and find a way to show them how their perspective conflicts with reality, to maybe get them rational. I think, I hate to say it, but I think my knee-jerk reaction when I run into what I perceive to be an irrational belief is to try to fix it. I think it bothers the analytical part of me. I think if I'm really honest with myself, it scares me because it makes me to some degree question my own worldview or just the reliability of people if they can be so out of touch with what I think is an accurate worldview. And I think this is reflected. It's very timely. Right now you can very easily find yourself in a echo chamber or a bubble online related to, COVID, politics, what have you. And you can see this play out on social media, two people with very different worldviews, and it creates this really impulsive knee-jerk reaction that just quickly devolves into, name calling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
For a more lighthearted example, I've actually was just thinking about way back in 2005 or 6. I had just had about a year and a half of lifting under my belt. I was a personal trainer at the YMCA. And I had a client, a very eccentric client, an older person who did some photography as an amateur. And they saw that I'd done like my first cut and I was getting down to not as lean as I thought I was, but reasonably lean. And they were like, hey, it might be cool if we take some shots of you, just like some professional shots. And this was the time where this didn't mean, like filters on your phone, but actually like a digital camera and stuff like that. And, he took the pictures and we did some poses and stuff like that. And they were a little more on the artsy side. Like I said, more on the eccentric side person. And the client afterwards looked at them and he went, man, we should send these off to Oprah. You can get you on there. These are really good. Like, I think your story is very inspiring. My story at the time was I'm a personal trainer who lifts weights and I did a cut. So I don't really, and I started to laugh and I realized it was not a joke. Like he actually thought that he and I had a good chance of sitting down on the Oprah Winfrey show to talk about his photography and my physique. And I did not know how to respond to that. I was dumbfounded. This is 2005, so I was literally, I was like 22 or 23. And this was someone in their 50s or 60s, like 3 times my life experience. And I just didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to deal with it. And all I could think of was, please don't bring this up again on Monday when I have to bring you through a personal training session. This is going to, I don't know what to do with this. So I think this is probably something that it has wide-reaching impacts. Like I mean, Amanda, what? I'm not saying like what should I say, what should I have done, but I imagine you run into things like this. Like in retrospect, I think, oh, this person probably may have been on and off medication. Probably, I think was bipolar. There was a few other things that I think about, and I think that's just something that we do run into occasionally as coaches, probably on smaller terms, but we're often wholly unprepared to deal with. Because that was my experience. Just dumbfounded,
Yeah, that can certainly happen at times where I'll be floored at times with clients coming to me saying they never want to fight with or have disagreements with their partners or never experience negative emotions. And I'm like, okay, I hear you. But yes, sometimes you don't really know what to say. And we kind of just have to roll with it and set some boundaries even. And maybe later on we can get into that discussion about how do we do that with clients to also still create safety in the relationship, because that's also very important in as a therapist and having safety within the therapeutic atmosphere. And I'm sure it's definitely very important as a coach with your athletes as well. Yeah, so we want to be able to openly have conversations with them.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think like the last thing that you want to do in one of those situations, like if you want to help someone, you don't want to make them feel like you're dumb or I can't share what I'm thinking with the person who's supposed to have my back.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, that was, I thought that'd be an entertaining random story, but I think it does put a face on just sometimes how out there stuff can be. Let's bring it a little more into the realm of reality. Brad, talk to me about your experiences with this and how this has affected you and how important maybe you've realized it is to do this right.
Yeah, I've definitely learned the hard way. I didn't have a little a manual that I could take notes from and, kind of write down word for word what Amanda was been saying. I had to kind of learn it first world, the hard way when kind of, feet hit the pavement. And I think the way that I learned was, how should I say this, avoiding the subject. Because, for whatever reason, maybe it's just my upbringing, maybe it's because I was raised Catholic. You didn't want to hurt feelings, you don't want to squash passions. People are very, a lot of times when they come to us, they're very motivated. I mean, they're willing to spend their hard-earned money. They're willing to sacrifice birthdays and times with their family and things like this, right? And so, basically my way of dealing with it at the time was just, I'm not going to say not dealing with it, but trying as best as I could to help them achieve what I thought that they could, achieve, and not really, just like I said, avoiding their delusions, like you said, Eric.
Yeah.
And that was the wrong way to go about that. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is, or at least what has happened with me, is that all of a sudden they're just going to have this aha moment, and they're going to realize that they're not getting what it is that they want. And guess whose fault it is? It's mine. Mm-hmm. It's not theirs. It's not, it's not, I mean, really, ultimately, it's nobody's fault. If anything, the real sin there is that I was not transparent and did things like Amanda talked about, ask questions. How did you come about these things, and what is it that makes you believe that these things are possible, And so, yeah, I had to learn that the hard way. And now I do the exact opposite. I'm very transparent. I'm like, okay, and like I said, I'm learning something right now during this podcast. I'm taking notes. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I always set expectations, and that's usually what I do. Is I pretty much ask them, what are your expectations? Do you think that they're realistic? Things like that. And that's kind of like step one, especially if I see a red flag. When I have the guy that says, hey, I think you can sit down with Oprah and we can have this discussion. Red flag, let's start talking about that. Brad, you better deal with this right now.
No, that's well said, man. I too have taken that tact at times. I'll kick this can down the road. And I think for me, it probably comes from different motivations. And I think with more quote unquote, like milder, I'm going to call them delusions, but I don't think there's such a thing as mild delusions. Really, that's not the right word for it. Let's say slightly unrealistic expectations. Especially if it's at an early stage lifter. Sometimes I'm happy to just be like, well, hey, like we're just getting started. Let's focus on progress. We'll see where we end up. It's really difficult to predict what you're capable of. Some people have, the right genetics for it, but right now, some people don't. Right now, let's just focus on doing the best that you can do for you.
Yeah.
And I think my hope is that they're going to be able to calibrate those expectations with a little more experience. And while I think that is true to some degree, I think if you have to assess your own motivation. Are you doing this out of avoidance and then just like, oh, but they'll figure it out, or do you really think that actually is the right path? Because there's a difference between someone who is new and doesn't know what to expect from lack of experience and someone who, like you said, Brad, has some red flags. To maybe give some more examples of how experience can really, cure some things. Brad, you've got a son. You've also coach football. And I remember as a kid, and this is very normal, just to kind of normalize this idea of not having realistic expectations. I mean, if you ask your average 6-year-old, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You're going to get some really beautiful answers. I'll put it that way. Some of them might be unrealistic. Based on probabilities, like I want to be president or I want to be an astronaut. They're not completely impossible. And hell, maybe that person is going to be the valedictorian and the star athlete. and all the other good stuff that would be required to get to that point. But you also get some things like, I want to be a turtle, or I want to be a princess. Not that it's impossible to become a princess if you go to certain countries and marry the right people. But again, some of those things we know that that's going to change with age and with experience. But a tough one as an example that I'd love to get your thoughts on, Brad, is you've probably worked with some high school football players whose goal maybe is to play in the NFL or go to a Division I school. And I would love to hear, how do you deal with that with younger athletes? Is that something that, have you learned from that? Is there anything you brought into 3DMJ coaching?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. That last part, because yeah, I mean, not only like high school athletes, but I mean, really athletes. I mean, I'm a trainer for a few different sports, women's football, et cetera, and so you see this a lot, and probably, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm right or wrong, but typically my standard response is, okay, well, first of all, we have to understand that is a very lofty goal, and it's going to take a lot of work, and not just work on the field, and getting your body in shape and learning your skills and whatnot, but it's going to take a lot of work sitting at the dining room table or at the desk. You're going to have to get your name out there. You're probably going to have to spend some money in some sort of a marketing, getting your name out there, some way of getting, more than just the circle of people that and you have to be prepared for, and know that right now, because if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to get your name out there and you're not willing, it's very unlikely that that's just going to fall into your lap. And so typically that's how I've responded to it. Because I mean, most high school athletes, they just kind of think to themselves, well, all I got to do is dominate on the field and I'm going to get Division I scholarships just dropped into my lap, And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's not how the real world works. You're going to have to, no one's going to come to you. You're going to have to get yourself out there. And usually right there, that will a lot of times kind of, how should I say that? I'm not going to say weed out, the ones that aren't willing to put in that work, but I guess it just more so makes a person or that person realize, oh, wow, this is big world now. This is the entire, it makes them realize that, that it's a lot more than just this football field that I'm on right now. Now, how do I bring that into 3DMJ coaching? I guess I kind of do that and never really put two and two together, when I start throwing out names, it's like, okay, you want to earn your WNBF pro card. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to kind of look to people that have been successful doing that before. We got to look to the Jeff Alberts and we got to look to the Alberto Nunez and, world champions like Brian Whitaker and, guys like this. Right. And know that, okay, even if we cannot achieve that kind of a physique, we're going to have to do similar things that they do. You know what I mean? And we're going to have to be willing to do that. So I guess it's kind of the same thing in a way. And it's just your question has made me realize that I've got kind of the same strategy, but in two different realms. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that it's more so my way of coaching that and making those expectations a little bit more realistic is coming from the angle of the work that it takes, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually a great way to set expectations, because when you have people who are new to it, their expectations aren't just around the outcomes. A lot of times their expectations are on what's required to do that. How long will it take? How many hours of training will I have to put in? And sometimes you get people with unrealistic expectations on the other side of it. I mean, how many times do we have people who engage with Jeff Alberts and they're like, wait, you only train 5 hours a week in total or 4 hours a week in total. How could you achieve that? I thought bodybuilders train 2 hours a day, every day type of thing. And so I think it's really valuable instead of assessing right now when that 8-year-old wants to be president, whether that's possible, or whether our 19-year-old first-time bodybuilder can get his pro card, whether that's possible, or whether your freshman, second-string linebacker can get a Division I scholarship, if that's possible, you ultimately just let them, you set the expectations of what work will be needed to get to where you want to go. And I think that's valuable, because in many cases, it's not just one potential outcome. There are multiple steps to it. We'll go all the way back to the 8-year-old. So let's say you want to become president, right? A political career, there isn't a track to become president. We've had people who were congressmen and women. We've had people who were governors. Ultimately, you're going to have a huge, long political career before you get there. And if it ends as a senator or if it ends as a governor, it's not like, well, ideally, it's not like you sit there and go, well, that was a waste, Just like if your goal is to become an astronaut, if you become a Navy test pilot and that's where it ends, well, shit, you're still a Navy test pilot.
That's pretty awesome.
Exactly. And I think the same thing is true in sport. Just like there are Division III and Division II and Division I, there is also, pro football in Canada. There's also pro football in Europe. There's also semi-pro, and there's, NFL, and there's the NFL like practice teams, and there's all different levels. So ultimately, if someone weeds themselves out, I would say, because I don't think, like you said, Brad, your intention is not to weed them out, but it's to give them these realistic expectations of what they need to do. And if there's certain pieces of that puzzle that they're not willing to do, that allows them to then recalibrate. Okay, well then what am I willing to do? And therefore, where can I reasonably get to? So I think that is like a really good way to go. And sometimes I think it goes back to the intention of, am I kicking the can down the road here? Or do I think that they could recalibrate on their own if given more information? And that's different than just ignoring it. So, we've revealed the secret of therapy before, Amanda, on this podcast, that people saying things and believing it on their own is more powerful than me just telling you that. So I would imagine the goal in a therapeutic setting, just as it would be in a coaching setting, would be for someone to have these realizations on their own and to be able to recalibrate. Am I off base there?
No, you're 100% on target. Oftentimes I have to restrain myself from like pointing out all discrepancies and cognitive distortions and getting right to it within the first couple of sessions. But you're so right. Like, it's so much more powerful once the client reaches that realization themselves, because it just cascades into an embodiment of something totally different. And that's what we want. We want them to create something new and more functional for them. So yeah, therapy secret revealed.
Really quick favor, guys. If you enjoy these shows and have been a listener for quite some time, we would really, really, really appreciate it if you could take the time to give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your preferred podcast app may be. Having lots of ratings and audience feedback makes our show become more visible across multiple platforms, and it supports our mission of helping as many people as we can to be the best athletes, coaches, and lifting enthusiasts that they could possibly be. So if you're not driving and wouldn't be dangerous, pause this thing right now and give us an honest review over on your podcast app, and we would love you even more than we already do. Thanks for taking the time, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Amanda, if I could ask a question of you.
Sure.
And I'll give a little bit of context here using myself. I had some delusional expectations myself. I think we all have at some point. But I remember in 2008 competing against our very own Alberto Nunez. And I had, unbeknownst to me, because I didn't have the knowledge that I had the delusion that I was going to beat him. And all I had to do was get more shredded than he did. And that was kind of the bottom line, And I mean, I realized, I came to the realization of that myself. It took a few years, you know what I mean? But is it better for someone who is setting unrealistic expectations to realize it themselves? And is there a way to coach them to that conclusion?
Yeah. So your initial question was, is it better for them to realize it themselves?
Is there more acceptance? Is there less denial, less anger, if they realize it themselves, because I know that sometimes, like, even if, let's say that Eric came to me and said, Brad, there's no way you're going to beat Alberto. I don't care how shredded you get. He would have been right. But I would have been like, F you, Eric.
Yeah, there would have been more resistance
exactly,
to the
exactly.
quote-unquote truth.
And the fact that I kind of came to that conclusion myself, there was no anger. It was just like, you know what, this is nobody's fault. And I kind of came to it myself. And so along with that first question, is there a way, that you're aware of that I can help somebody come to that conclusion themselves?
Yeah, I think we can go back to the initial questioning of how someone reached this conclusion and having them go through the process of experiencing maybe setbacks and kind of like reality checks. And so we can kind of guide the conversation around helping them realize certain realities and seeing how that sits with them. Otherwise, it's just a matter of experience. And even then, it could be hard for people to digest that and fully accept it.
I mean, that does make sense, that if someone's not ready to hear something, they wouldn't bring it up to themselves, if you will.
Yeah.
So if someone else says it, unless they're just, they have a really good relationship with you, they really trust, I think at least the knee-jerk reaction will be, F you. It might be initial anger, hold on, wait a second, let me think, I trust this person, okay, I'll have a conversation. But I think that is it's certainly not going to be you can't expect the initial reaction to be, oh, I see, I've totally changed my worldview because you've said that, So that, I think that makes a lot of sense. Brad, this is semi-off topic, but I will say that 2008, 9, and 10 were turning points in natural bodybuilding. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that you were delusional in that point, because coming in shredded was a factor that mattered so much more then, because it was far rarer. And at that point, you were slaughtering everybody because you were getting shredded, and like very, very shredded. So I would put forth that you were recalibrating your expectations of what you could achieve in an era where all of a sudden the face of natural bodybuilding was rapidly getting more competitive. Like if you were to look at the 2010 Pro Mayhem, that was the year that I specifically remember where I was like, shit is getting real. Like, what is going on? Like Cleveland Thomas, Kiyoshi Moody, Philip Ricardo Jr., Panix Pierre, and Moji Alua top 5. Like, that was insane. And I specifically, I think that era was akin to what is going now in powerlifting. And it has so rapidly changed what is considered a good total. Like if you were to go to 2012 or 13, what is a good total in any weight class? You have to go up now. You have to go down 2 weight classes to make that an elite total. So I don't think you were alone in that. Let's put it that way, Brad. I think there was a lot of people who did not, like, it wasn't even like the realization of, oh, there's levels to this shit. It's like new levels emerged, that we were just released, So anyway, tangent, but I don't think you were delusional.
Well, and reflecting back on that period of time, success kind of led to my delusion in a way, because I was just kind of looking at that one gift that I had, that one superpower that I had, and it made me kind of blind to the other aspects of bodybuilding that are so important, like symmetry, and muscularity and size and things like that, But this kind of circles back to something that you had talked about earlier, Eric, about, okay, yeah, maybe your delusion of making it to the NFL gets you a lot further than, you basically thought that you could have. You might end up with a Division III scholarship, which, I mean, let's face it, that is rare,
Yes.
So one thing I can say is that, while looking at that in retrospect, if I did not have that delusion and I did not go after it with that steadfast approach, that motivated approach, if I'm going to beat Alberto Nunez, I may not have won my pro card, because
Absolutely.
essentially that's kind of what ended up happening, was that I showed up to the right shows at the right time with the right competition and had tremendous success that year, because really, if you think about it, if I would have waited 1 year and tried again in 2009, I would not have gotten my pro card. Because then I would have been competing with the likes of Moji Alua. I would have been competing with the likes of Jeff Alberts. And again, my expectations would have been, I can beat these guys if I can get more shredded, when the reality is, no, Brad, you're not meeting these guys. So I don't know, but my kind of ramblings here, they kind of are one of the things that I've circled on my little notes here, is that I think how should I say this? When expectations are kind of properly, when they properly reveal themselves, they can lead you to greater success than probably you could have if either A, your expectations were squashed, or B, you didn't have, the realization that you had. So I don't know if I made sense there, but basically, I don't think I would have had the success that I would have had in 2008 if I didn't have my somewhat delusional expectations.
No, I totally understand what you're talking about. And it's sometimes like some of the natty or not witch hunt stuff, some of the supposed rationale that goes behind that, I just don't buy. Like, oh, these fake natties, they set up these unrealistic expectations for lifters and it just ruins them. And I'm like, hold on, like before I was even aware of this whole natty or not thing, I watched Pumping Iron. And I wanted to look like Arnold and Frank Zane and all these guys. And literally like every other guy I know or person who got into bodybuilding had the same experience of having oh yeah, I want to look like a 6-time Mr. Olympia. And having literally zero knowledge of what went into that in terms of a genetic standpoint, a mental aspect, the work put in, the anabolics required, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't ruin my whole worldview when it all came crashing down. And that's not to say that I don't think there's anything unethical or problematic around, say, someone who is on anabolics claiming that this supplement or this program or that anyone can achieve it. But I certainly think there is something to be said for nurturing that initial hunger and fire. And ultimately, you don't know if you're going to be the next Arnold, right? Mm-hmm. And what you don't want to do is take someone who might have a ton of potential and put an artificial limiter on that. You don't want to give them a lower ceiling than actually exists. And I think that is the danger of just being I tell it like it is, man, type of person. Like someone's like, I want to get my pro card my first season. It's like, that shouldn't even be a goal. Like, well, I mean, maybe it shouldn't be the focus, but it's certainly not necessarily unrealistic in all cases. So as I've been reflecting on what you're saying, Brad, I think a lot of the times in a sporting context, the issue is not necessarily unrealistic expectations. It's a focus on the outcome and not the process a lot of the times, which is something I'm reflecting on now. So I think, like, is the problem that you want to become a professional athlete or win worlds? No. The problem might be that that's the only thing you focus on, and then that's the only thing you're motivated by, and that's the only way you define success, Because if that is your sole fuel in the gas tank, and then you are told, stuffed right in the face, that's not possible or that shouldn't be your goal, you're left with nothing. And at the best case scenario, there's going to be this recalibration period where you try to find out how to stay motivated. And at least during that period, you're going to have some less productive training, some less productive, lifestyle, stress levels. And you're going to be trying to find a way to re-get that fire back. And that was very much my experience. I had to figure out a way to focus on progress and becoming the best version of me that led to the same level of dedication and motivated training and consistency that I had previously, focusing on getting my pro card and winning a pro title, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, I don't know, I would love to hear your two thoughts on that, but I think that's probably more often the issue rather than the expectation itself.
Yeah. And I think, 100%. the question now becomes, how do we maintain or keep that drive that this unrealistic expectation has placed on this individual or whoever it is? And it's a matter of finding why you want to do it. What's the whole point? Not for some end result, but to feel a certain way. Let's focus on that feeling, that inspiration, the drive, and how do we continue fostering that throughout the whole process, and finding why it's important for you. And I think that could help manage the expectations a bit more and continue that motivation to pursue something.
Absolutely, that's really well said. So then that begs the question: how do we do that with a client? You know, and I would love to get your thoughts on that. So if you can identify and you can have the realization as a coach that there's some gold here. This unrealistic expectation
Yes.
is turning this person to a monster in the gym. It's turning them. They're incredibly focused. I actually have to get them to figure out how to not let this take over their whole life. But drive, that's not an issue. That's not a question. They're not going to be missing gym sessions, right? So how do we keep the good and not lose that as we bring them to a place where they're not also setting themselves up for failure?
Yeah, who wants to start that?
Give them the answer. The answer.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot here, Amanda, but yeah, that's exactly my question, you know? And I mean, maybe you don't have one. I think that's fine, but maybe we can just discuss and kind of spitball between the three of us. How does this happen? Because I can guarantee you, if I didn't have the mindset that I was going to beat Alberto Nunez, I would not have done the things that I was doing that ultimately led to my pro card. You know, I was doing some crazy stuff. I was visualizing in the middle of the night, me getting my hand raised, you know, and shaking Alberto's hand as he was walking off the stage, you know, and I mean, just doing crazy things, having people just drill me into the ground as I was doing my training, you know. And that's sometimes that's the kind of stuff that you need to do to get the most out of yourself, you know. And I mean, sure, probably, I don't know. It almost scares me to think if someone would have came to me and even nicely and kind of like we're trying to say, set the expectations realistically in a nice way and the way that we're talking about doing, it almost scares me to think that I would not have done any of that and I would have not got to the success that I did get, you know? So again, I don't know if you have the answer to that, but Eric just took the words right out of my mouth. How is that possible? You know, maybe we can come to that conclusion between the three of us.
I think a good place to start is positively reinforcing more behaviors that we want to see that are more adaptive and more healthy for the client. Even alongside like pointing out maybe questionable things, or maybe this isn't as helpful. How can we sort of manage that and change this? But if you're still getting resistance, I think we just solely focus on, positively reinforcing the behaviors that we want to see more of.
Because ultimately, I think ultimately it just kind of comes down to a nice soft landing. You know what I mean? What I mean by that is I came, and it wasn't some years later that I came to the conclusion that I was never going to beat Alberto Nunez, at least not at his best. You know, sure, maybe I could beat him if I was shredded and he was fat. I probably could have beat him when he was the 2007 version of himself and I was the 2008 version of myself, you know. But it's kind of like I want to provide that client that's got the unrealistic expectations, but yet that incredible drive, a nice soft landing, so that when they realize, okay, this is real world now. This is what I can achieve, and still have them get the most out of themselves. You know what I mean? Am I making sense there?
Yeah,
I think so. And I think to kind of echo what Rizzo was saying earlier, figuring out the why behind the client's motivations, I think is really, really important. And then asking the right questions and then positively reinforcing the good behaviors. And I actually recall, this would have been 2011 during my prep. Alberto did exactly that for me. because I don't have like the perfect structure for bodybuilding. Um, and I think Berto could tell that one of the things I wanted that did motivate me, that wasn't just internal, I want to improve, because I had that at that point. The external aspect was I wanted to be, and I still want to be, respected as a bodybuilder. I want to be seen as I belong. And I want to, people to look and go, man, like he may not have had the best structure, but he did everything in his power to move to a high level, and he placed, pretty damn well. He took he played that hand masterfully, even though he was not dealt a royal flush type of deal. And he had a conversation with me where he said, I actually think you could probably win a lower tier pro show or place top 5 in worlds as a pro. And again, this is like 2011 time, so not exactly the same era. He said, but you've got to do everything perfectly. So he spoke exactly to my motivations, at least the external ones, because I had a drive to win, but I wasn't quite at the level I wanted to be at. So he positively reinforced the things that I did have in my corner, and the tools I had of doing things right, being on point, being focused, focusing on the long haul. And I think he masterfully captured that all together. And that was one of the most motivating conversations I've had as far as thinking about myself in bodybuilding, because there were times where I would just be so frustrated with the effort I was putting in and what I was getting out at certain points in my career, where sometimes I did question, is this worth it? And I think there are time points where you're looking for something as an athlete to keep you moving forward in the right direction. You're mentally and emotionally beat down, physically beat down too. And the wrong type of information or perspective or push could have drastically altered my career. I was very impressionable at that point. And I think Berto knew that, and he masterfully stepped in and helped me make the decision to keep pushing. And it's exactly that scenario where you can have the same outcome in the same person with two different mindsets, and they can view one as a win and one as a failure. That's aim for the stars, and if you hit the moon, you'll be happy. Or aim for the stars, and if you don't hit the stars, you're a fucking failure. So I think that's an example where that was done really well, because it wasn't like Berto just interrupted me and said that. I want to say we were in the hotel room for him competing in the NGA show, like in Idaho. Like it was just me, Barb, and him. Barb wasn't in the room at the time, and I was talking about it. We were both dieting. I want to say this was like April, so I had a few more months before I did my shows in August. And I was just having a bit of a pity party, and he listened. He just listened to me, and he heard me out, and then he chimed in and got my perspective. So he did everything we're talking about. He heard me out. He identified what my motivations were. He positively reinforced what was realistic, what I was doing right that he thought was good. And he didn't necessarily challenge my negative or positive beliefs, because I had this push-pull.
Nice.
Like, I don't have good structure. It was a belief I have. How rooted is that in reality? I don't know. I've heard people say that I have good structure. I have people say that I have bad structure. I mean, I do know. I think I have a much more realistic perspective. But in my 2011 brain at that time, the belief I had was I have a quote-unquote bad structure. And I would have given resistance had he challenged me on that. But I also had a very strong desire to push it as far as I could. And he could have either, big upped me more than was appropriate, or he could have, stuffed that and been like, you know what, you're going to be a great amateur, and I think that's all you should hope for. And I think both of those would have gotten some form of resistance, or at least displeasure. It would have been something I would have had to deal with emotionally if he'd gone either way, now or later. So yeah, I think I'm reflecting as I'm talking, so apologies if I'm rambling so much and taking up airtime. But I think hopefully that example I gave just shows how individual that conversation needs to be, because it was very much dependent on what I was giving resistance on, where I was at that time, what motivated me, and why I wanted to pursue those things. So,
wow,
yeah, I'm going to shut up for a while now.
I am learning so much here. It's kind of like I'm actually making my little, standard operating procedure for managing expectations right now as we speak. But, Eric, you just basically answered my question of providing that soft landing. You know what I mean? And what I wrote down in my little notes here is that, there was a soft landing through, he didn't challenge your expectations, or he didn't squash your thinking of you can win a lower level pro show and become a pro. But at the same time, he gave you this slim chance that you can achieve it. But, it's a slim chance, but it can be possible. If you do everything perfect.
There's a chance.
There you go. There you go. Perfect. Yeah. And it's funny because I'm reflecting too, and I'm realizing that I do this a lot with people, and I guess I never defined it. Like, for example, my son has aspirations of playing pro football basically at any level. He knows that the funnel for high school football players to make it in the NFL is dramatically steep, and I always tell him, look, son, you never know what can be achieved, but all you know is that you know the right people, you show up at the right time, you're against the right people, you have no control over all that. But with your hard work and that, like I was saying before, that motivated personality and that Brad that was just bound and determined and hellbound to beat Alberto Nunez, if all the cards fall in line, you can achieve that. And that's kind of what Alberto was saying to you. If all the cards fall into line with your work ethic and with everything that you're trying to achieve, it is possible that you could achieve that thing. But basically at the same time saying it ain't going to happen for sure. I can't guarantee it.
Yeah.
I am not betting my paycheck.
Yep.
But yeah, you answered my question perfectly with that one story. And it's funny because I've heard that you've told that story to me like at least half a dozen times, and I just never put two and two together.
Yes.
Well, shit, neither did I, man. I don't think I ever reflected on that conversation as Alberto helping me stay motivated and also recalibrate my expectations until we had this podcast right now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Call him up after.
That sneaky son of a bitch. Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes we got to get out of the way and just let the client experience it for themselves. There's only so much that we can do.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who are excited and motivated by the effort and hard work that goes into competitive bodybuilding. I think a lot of people really, because at the very least, if you don't focus totally externally, you can see that your hard work makes incredible changes in your body. So you get that relatively quick, which is why contest prep can be addicting and why that's kind of a dangerous thing, because it is so demanding of you. Why contest prep can be addicting is because you get that not immediate, but relatively quick, like effort reward process. Weekly I'm seeing these changes. Awesome. I'm dialed in. I'm focused. And I think if you can hook into that and you can give people, positive encouragement for that, that can be a very powerful thing. And I think, like when I look at you, Brad, I think about you're the type of person in bodybuilding who don't let them catch you slipping. That's kind of the way I have motivated similar athletes who maybe don't have the best structure or a ton of size or they don't have the best symmetry, but they're very hard workers and they can get really lean. I tell them like, look, you're going to be a threat at every show you go to. People have to do their homework to show up. They can't show up and copy off their neighbor or you're going to catch them slipping. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things where I think something you see across almost all athletes, and I actually talked about this on Iron Culture not too long ago with some of our guests. We had Ashton Rushka on with Bryce Lewis. Was that almost all athletes, and Bryce was reflecting on this, have a belief that they are special in some way, that they have a superpower, like you said, Brad, and that gives them the sense of confidence in hard times. Like I'm a clutch player, or I'll outwork anyone else. Sometimes these become memes and they almost seem delusional and we joke about it online, but they're incredibly useful tools as it gives them an anchor in the storm. And I think that kind of idea for someone who maybe isn't, perfectly built, but they maximize everything in their power is, and I've done this, like You know, you're always a potential threat. You know, you show up to the show, you do your work, and you will have the respect of the people in the audience, the respect of the judges. And if someone comes in off, someone blows their peak, you might fuck around and get a pro card, man. You know, and that's the kind of I think that's the kind of language I use when I'm with those clients. But I think it's very important before you can even have that conversation is to establish what their why is, like Amanda said, and then also to try to get them much more focused on the process, or they won't even get there in the first place. So yeah, those have been my reflections on what I think is a really awesome conversation thus far.
Yeah. I'll piggyback on that and say this has been tremendously helpful for me. And I have to say, I'm now excited to see the response that we get. So,
do you guys ever encounter athletes that maybe their expectations are too low?
Yes.
And maybe they need some pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great.
Yeah. What do you guys do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's less common, which is obviously because we're just getting into it now, and Brad and I are like, oh yeah, good point, you know. But I think, yeah, that is actually an interesting addition to this conversation because it certainly does happen. And that's a tough one because I don't think, so the answer is yes, but I think the reason why it's less common is that a lot of people are attracted to bodybuilding because it's one of those like effort reward sports that, you know, we celebrate, you know, hard work so much to a point where it's probably an issue. But I think there's not a lot of people with low self-efficacy who are drawn to the sport of bodybuilding because they eliminate themselves already, but they're definitely there. You know, actually, I am reflecting on, so the Matt Ogus era was a really interesting time for us because it kind of blew us up on YouTube at that time. And he became, with his Matt Versus series, a really good example of someone just kind of vlogging the whole prep, their emotions with it. And also, you know, this is the kind of key ingredient if you want to blow up on social media. He had a sick physique, you know? And I remember working with him. And I think now we can all sit here and go, yes, like Matt Ogus's physique in 2011 was really good, but it is like, it's not anything that is 4 standard deviations above the mean in natural bodybuilding, right? So I had a Skype consultation client, I want to say in 2013, who I worked with, gave some advice, and that was it. I hadn't heard from him again. I thought, okay, cool. We gave him a plan. Hopefully he's out there somewhere executing it, making some great gains. He emailed me back a couple years later and said, hey, can you please give me the quote unquote real advice, the type of stuff that you would give Matt Ogus? I'm convinced that he's not natural and that you were helping him beat the drug tests and that clearly a physique like that can only be achieved if someone is on anabolics. Needless to say, this was pre this podcast. I didn't respond that well. I was deeply offended. Felt like, I think the thing that offended me the most is that he thought I would take his money and sit there for an hour and a half and give him a plan that I knew was suboptimal and just hold back or something like that. In reality, that he just needed drugs and that I was just this, you know, massive conspirator mastermind of just, you know, giving out shitty information and taking people's money. It wasn't really that I was offended on behalf of Matt, but I look back now and I think the issue there was that he thought so little was possible for himself. And I mean, it hadn't been long enough for him to achieve, you know, what Matt Ogus achieved, to start lifting weights at 14. He didn't necessarily assess like, how does my structure differ than his? I can't comment on the gentleman's work ethic because I don't really remember. And again, it was only a Skype consultation. But I think ultimately, when it really came down to it, was that he had very low expectations, and he thought that he couldn't achieve it, and he also thought that to normalize that therefore most people who achieved something that he previously thought was extraordinary were doing something that was outside of it. Like it had to be cheating or drugs, or it couldn't be something because I haven't achieved that yet. And I think that's probably one of the most common defense mechanisms that people have when they have low expectations, but they still want to maintain a belief that they can get somewhere, is that the people who do achieve something that I want, that I don't seem to think I can, are doing something that is outside of what I consider, okay or acceptable or normal, or they're lying. And it almost, I don't know, this, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is a clinical term, Amanda, but it almost seems like to some degree a level of narcissism, where you're protecting the ego so much that it can't be anything to do with my genetics. Genetics, it doesn't exist. Everyone has equal, playing field. Everyone has equal opportunities. So if they achieve it and I don't, they're cheating. Am I off base there?
No, you're not off.
Okay.
Yeah, it's some outside force that is influencing the results of something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually a tough one. And I'll tell you, I fumbled that ball, and it just resulted in that email address going in my blocked folder. So I didn't rescue that one. I responded very much like an offended human. You tell me my life's a lie, and then I'm a cheater, and that I stole your money and didn't help you. I didn't go, oh, interesting perspective. Thank you for sharing that. I hope you're well. Let's have a conversation. I basically just went and then blocked them. So,
Yeah.
Eric, I don't want to take up have you take up the entire podcast, but getting back to Rizzo's question, as I'm listening to you and I'm pondering the question, I'm thinking about people's sometimes like almost over humility in a way, and the reason I want to throw this back to you is I'm thinking of a very humble person that you coach, Bryce Lewis. There was a time when Bryce believed that he could not be a power lifter because he needed straps for his deadlifts. And I think there was one other issue. And again, kind of those lower expectations, because not only could he be a power lifter, he's a friggin' world champion, Yeah. Are you even aware of how you managed to coach him through that? Did you even coach him through that, or did it just evolve organically?
I have to give Bryce a ton of credit for the times he's overcome the mental barriers to him getting to where he is today. Maybe I'm being too humble. I'd like to think I provided a space to hear him, to listen, and to encourage him to seek out help when he needed something that was beyond what I thought was my capacity, or that I wasn't necessarily the best person to help him. I have connected Bryce with sports psychologists over time. He's done a great job of normalizing therapy, normalizing sports psychology, normalizing vulnerability, and he has very much redefined his own relationship with competitiveness multiple times since, say, 2011 or 12. So I do recall, him like that. That's a deep cut. The straps thing. That's old school, and that was very early on for Bryce. I think more recently, I'm reflecting on, I think Bryce was maybe too internally motivated and enjoyed having fun, the social aspect of competing. When I say too, I don't mean like for everybody. I mean for him, because it ended up creating stress and a conflict. If it had worked, I have no judgment of what his mentality was at the time. I just know that it wasn't facilitative. So that is an outcome-based judgment that I'm making, to be clear. There's not a right way to approach competitiveness. So anyway, when he started competing at high-level meets in the USAPL, when he did the Arnold for the first time, in his first few outings in USAPL Nationals, he had a really rough patch. It's almost night and day today, where he's seen as Mr. Consistency. Like a bad day for him is going 7 for 9, but most of the time he's 8 for 9 or 9 for 9. He very reliably gets PR totals on the platform. He very reliably performs well, and he's done everything he can in his power to set him up for success. Big shout out to also Matt and Susie Hartwood-Gary for that as well. That's not just Bryce being amazing. He's got some great people in his corner, but that is his choice to have them in his corner. So anyway, I'm going all over the place, but in 2014-15, in that time frame, Bryce had a few really rough meets where he totaled well below what he had done in training, and only got a handful of lifts and was near bombing out in a few instances, but did not. And it was because the environment at USAPL Nationals and the Arnold is very different, highly competitive. The focus is on you, and it wasn't a meet at Body Tribe, which is what he was used to, And today, if we fast forward, Bryce does want to beat other people. He does think he's a better power lifter. He objectively is in most cases. And he is motivated by winning. However, in addition to that, he has like a whole deck of cards of goals. So when he went into 2021 Nationals, where he went head to head with Ashton, he had a whole host of things he was doing. So he was focusing on hitting a PR total. He was focused on hitting PR lifts on each of the three, a certain milestone total that he had targeted for a very long time that he'd only done in a mock meet that he wanted to do officially. And he was also focused on beating Ashton and winning, which I think it's not new in the last few years, but to the era you're talking about, Brad, it would have been new. Because at the time, 2012, 11, and 13 in powerlifting, I mean, I remember there's a time where Bryce did, I want to say, collegiate nationals in the USAPL, and there wasn't even a unequipped division, and he placed third competing raw against a bunch of people who were wearing equipment. He didn't care. He didn't think about it. I mean, obviously, if he was highly motivated by competition, he would have figured out how to get in a squat suit and a bench press shirt, right? But that just wasn't what he was about. So I think when he was more honest with himself and he cultivated maybe some of what he had as a volleyball player back in the day, is he started to actually value and think in competitive terms. And that required a whole new set of adaptations. So, and this is something we have talked about a lot, finding that he gets demotivated by seeing other lifters train in his weight class because now he has that comparison trap and it creates anxiety for him, right? So deciding to be competitive allowed him to be successful and to focus on his performance and all the things that allowed him to perform on the platform at an Arnold or a USAPL Nationals or a Worlds. And that was a new chapter. And that competitiveness was part of it. But then that created a new cascade of coaching opportunities and discussions we had of, okay, well, how do I not get too wrapped up in focusing on other people? So he does this thing where he's at a certain time point away from a competition. He basically unfollows everyone in his weight class and gets off social media so he can focus on him because he knows the process of winning is different than focusing on winning. And then, the new chapter for him now is in 2021, after he placed second to Ashton. Shout out Ashton, great job. Is he sat down with Ashton and he said, so here's what I struggle with. Like, how do you see me? What do you think? And they had a conversation about it because I think Bryce was struggling with, do I really need to like totally shut these people out of my lives? Do I need to like dehumanize them and make them my enemy in my mind? Like, how do I foster a competitiveness that I'm more comfortable with? And I want to be authentic. That's something Bryce expressed to me. So, he's got all these posts as a coach and as the head of TSA about, internal motivation, focusing on the process, fair play and all this good stuff. Yet in his mind, he's like, Ashton is the enemy. And he felt there was like, that was disingenuous, that he was off brand or being inauthentic. So, that was part of the reason I think he was excited to come on Iron Culture with Ashton and talk about that, and that he wanted to be open about it. So I think for Bryce, someone who has been powerlifting for a decade now, it is only natural to see, and starting as someone who was round back deadlifting at 495 pounds to now pulling 800 pounds, like seeing him progress through the sport and compete at different levels. He has had to recalibrate this. So I think what this brings to the discussion, and I feel like I've been talking way too much again, but this is your fault, Brad. I blame you. Is that this is not going to be a static thing. This is something that your expectations will need to change because your motivations will change and your why will change. So if you're not continuously tuned into your motivation and your why, then you can get out of whack with your expectations, in which we've talked about can drain your motivation. So long answer to a short question.
Well said.
Yeah, because I think people that have athletes, clients that have low expectations, I find it difficult to properly motivate them with more realistic expectations, and yet at the same time not feeling their ego beyond what it should be, because I want them to be humble and I want them to think to themselves, okay, I don't know. It's a fine balancing act. You know, I want them to realize, hey, look, you're the man, but I don't want to say, hey, you're the man. You know what I mean? I don't want them getting an overinflated ego when all of a sudden they come to this realization of, oh my God, I'm a lot more great than I thought I was, you know? So there again, probably a whole nother conversation and a whole nother can of worms that opened up on how to properly bring that out of a person on the other end of the spectrum when their expectations are too low. Because as you can tell, I'm hardly the expert in that arena as well.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, Eric, like you said, your why and your true intentions with your goals. I think with someone that has low expectations, I think we touch into territory of like some cognitive distortions as well as self-esteem. So if that's something that might need to be worked on outside of bodybuilding, because you're not going to find it through that.
Yeah. That's interesting. Amanda, I was thinking, I have definitely had clients who are successful only in bodybuilding, but not outside of it. And I think their only source of self-esteem or self-efficacy is in bodybuilding, but they have a core self-belief that is relatively negative, or at least not described by self-efficacy. And I see that often becomes a big problem because they don't really have personal self-efficacy. They have self-efficacy in bodybuilding, but it's the only thing they have. So it becomes this everything to them. And the risk of losing a show or not getting in shape or missing a peak or not improving season to season, not getting a pro card, placing outside of the top 5, not getting the first call out, what have you, wherever they're at in their journey, is so much more devastating and scary for them than it should be. So I think that is something that I see play out actually quite frequently, Amanda. So I think that's one of those times where I would absolutely be like, you know who would be better at helping you at this than me? I know this great chick.
LPCC.
That's right, the LPCC folks. And I would probably be dropping you a line for sure, because I think that is relatively common, and it doesn't look like low expectations in bodybuilding necessarily, but it's these very risky expectations. Let's put it that way. There's no sense of I have a family, a job, and a life outside of bodybuilding that I really like. It's this like I've got to be the best because what the hell else is there? I think we've actually talked about that a fair bit on the podcast, but I think it has an interesting link to this, that ultimately they might have their expectations set too low generally, but not necessarily within the side of the sport.
At that point, I would want to explore the person's beliefs, because that's what's really driving their behavior. Because otherwise they would be doing something else. So we want to see the motivation as to why they believe that. And if we could get to the core of it, then we could start shifting those beliefs to something that actually truly resonates with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we won't do anything we don't believe in.
Yeah, it's a shitty thing when I've had someone who really only sees their self-worth within bodybuilding. It kind of is this negative self-reinforcing behavior set where they don't engage much outside of bodybuilding. So they often they feel like they're not interesting or valuable or worthy of having a social life or having a relationship. And those skill sets kind of atrophy because they're not engaging with it. So I can think of many times when I was coaching where a lot of my coaching advice was around trying to get the person to stretch their zone of comfort and their experiences outside of the gym, outside of competitive bodybuilding, because I can't just tell them, I actually think you're a pretty cool dude or chick or person. They have to believe that. But if they don't get the opportunities to, experience more than just lifting weights and eating macros, then where's that going to come from? It's not going to happen. So that is always a very, very tough one. And I think many times, and honestly, some of those experiences were the motivations for why I was like, we really need to get a mental health specialist, someone we can refer to on the team, because I can't save you, So yeah.
Right.
Don't have that skill set. Yeah.
Well, shit. We done talked about a lot of good stuff, man.
Mm-hmm.
This was
We did.
Brad, we done did good. Amanda, we done did good. I want to just kind of open it up. You dropped a bomb on us right there at the end with the low expectations whole hallway we walked down. Do you have more, Amanda, that you wish to bless us with that might open the conversation up further, or things that you think maybe stones we left unturned or tangents we didn't walk down?
I think we could touch on how we as coaches and therapists, how do we manage disappointing our clients in that way when we're trying to like formulate their expectations and manage them? So how do you deal with disappointment?
I would love to hear how you deal with that, because I imagine the disappointment is relatively regular in your line of work.
How do I manage that? Well, I get used to it. Exposure is excellent in just sitting with things and not being scared of it, because it's part of the job. It's one of the reasons why they hired us, apart from helping them achieve their own goals. But we want to instill our own expertise in that. So just having confidence in your skill set and the reasons why you're trying to help your client.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the very beginning of this conversation where you were like, yeah, people have really unrealistic expectations. Sometimes they never want to have a conflict with their partner, or they never want to experience emotional pain. So that pretty much guarantees disappointment when
Yes.
that inevitability happens. So in those situations, let's say they come into their next session with you, how do you hold that space, and what do you try to get them to when that is the experience that they have? Do they blame you? I mean, sometimes I'm sure they do. Are they blaming their partner only? How do you help them find some ownership and a pathway forward in those cases?
Yeah. So you touched on that right there. Having ownership and having accountability for the situation is a big part of taking on the acceptance of this new reality that they have to adjust to. So I would help guide them towards that, having more compassion for themselves as well. Because sometimes we get into like a self-blame mode and taking full responsibility, like more than you really need to. So helping manage that as well has been key in it.
Yes. I've actually experienced that in my own therapy. You have a total blind spot to the way you're contributing to a problem, either in a relationship or a social dynamic you find yourself in regularly. And then when I finally did realize it, I'm like, oh, I see the problem. I'm a terrible person. And that wasn't exactly what the therapist wanted me to get to. And it requires this whole other piece of work. Because, man, when you get smacked by something like that, where you're fully not aware of how you're, again, where your perceptions don't match reality, which I think does happen to everyone to some degree or another, that can be a really not soft landing, like you were talking about, Brad.
Yeah, because I'm kind of thinking of myself and in my coaching experiences when, I know a client's potential, I know an athlete's potential, and we don't meet that. You know what I mean? Because that's happened on more than one occasion, and sometimes the outcome is good, and sometimes it's not. I've kind of been on both sides of that, and I hardly know, how to manage that. But I do know that the outcome is usually pretty good when I'm transparent and I say, look, you know what? I kind of feel like I dropped the ball here. There's something that I did that I'm really not aware of that didn't get the outcome that we were expecting, because when I've used that, usually positive outcomes happen. Usually the athlete's like, well, you know what? I appreciate that, coach, but I don't know if I totally believe that, in some cases. Or sometimes it's just like, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it was just the way the cards were played on that day. And because there's so much variability when you're talking about the performance of a body, especially whether it be peaking on the bodybuilding stage or peaking on the platform and really lifting to your potential, and beyond. However, it's hard. It's hard to come to that with the person that is not accepting of that, where they are willing, they're the one that wants to point the finger in your direction, because I've had that happen as well. And thinking back on that, it's usually when that's happened, I didn't have really the best coach client relationship with that person. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to explain why, because I always try, to make sure that we have the best relationship possible. But I guess I kind of answered my question in that, is so that, when you do fall short of those expectations, that's kind of the best way to be proactive and manage it, is really form a bond with your client. And that in itself is kind of risky, because you kind of open yourself up to be hurt at the same time, But I guess that's probably the best way to go about, like we said, a soft landing when when you see the potential and it doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. And I think, so I definitely think that some coaches fear owning their mistakes when they may have been there in the process, because they're afraid of those Reddit posts. They're afraid of those tags. They're afraid of coming down off the pedestal. Or like you said, Brad, maybe they do have a tight emotional bond with the client and they're afraid of hearing from someone they care about and trust. Yeah, you did fuck up, And I think, ironically, not admitting fault when you do think that you had some, or which by the way, this isn't an abnormal occurrence. Like, you take shots and you are guessing. Like every competitor who you coach for the first time who gets on stage, that peak week, even if you practice it sometime 4 weeks out, is a kind of a guess to some degree. And any coach who does not say that is lying at least a little bit. They may have faith in their system, but you just don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So I think it is a mistake, but an understandable one, for a coach to not, come forward and say, I had whatever element of fault here that is appropriate. Because when you don't admit any fault, it allows that resentment to turn into something that lashes out on the client's part. And I think very less often, like you were saying, Brad, is that when you admit fault and when you try to find ways that you can improve, you're essentially modeling ownership to the client. And they're going to want to meet you halfway, because now they're going, okay, coach is honest. We've got a good relationship. He is, trying to improve, and he is being solution oriented by looking at problems that we can fix, rather than saying, it's just the luck of the draw, or, it's because you traveled, or you sure you hit your macros, or what have you. They're not just hanging me out to dry after all this hard work. They're trying to come together with me. And I think it is the very rare time where they're going to go, yeah, you did fuck up, bro, and it's all on you. And Brad, I think the times when that does happen, it is probably because, just like you said, there wasn't the appropriate work on the front end. Maybe they expressed some really unrealistic expectations, and we just kind of pretended we didn't hear that. Or we, we didn't establish the right rapport on the front end. We didn't have the right communication, and I think that kind of brings it full circle. How do you protect yourself against the unbalanced disappointment where the client will not meet you halfway and you can't figure out together, what can you do to improve? It might be because you made some of those errors that we have made earlier in our careers on the front end. I think about, what do I do as we're going into a contest? And I think the most important thing for me on the mental side of the equation as a coach is that I want the athlete to have multiple things to see as a win coming from that competition. Many of them, regardless of how the show goes. I want them to appreciate the work they put in. I want to highlight everything we've learned in this process. I want to say, hey, very few people have even made it to get on stage. That is a huge win in and of itself. There's a graveyard miles wide of people who said they were going to prep and did not step on stage, and you ain't in it. This is a point for you to improve upon from here. This type of mental resilience, you can take that into your workplace, into your relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are things that I'm bringing up and I'm emphasizing, and I pay attention to as a coach if they do or don't engage or actually contradict those things. Like, you know what, all that's fine and good, but I just want to get my pro card, coach. That is as you said earlier, a red flag. So I think the goal should be that they should have already felt like they've won on some level before they have the opportunity to win or lose. And I think that can only happen with some of the stuff that we talked about earlier in this podcast. And if you are really with the client and it completely blindsides you, that, you know, they're disappointed and they totally blame you, you can probably look back and think at points where, oh, we didn't really talk much. Like all we had was just macros and training. You know, there wasn't really a relationship. I didn't know what their motivations were. Because I can think of like when I think of the times where I was shocked by the client's experience and they thought that I did a shitty job coaching them, it wasn't because I ignored warning signs. It's because I was comfortable being a consultant rather than a coach. I was comfortable just adjusting macros, making sure they looked the right way, coaching their posing, and I had this perspective that the mental game wasn't important, which was a very short period of my bodybuilding coaching, thankfully, but it did exist.
Wow. Yeah. We unpacked a lot in this one.
I just want to say, Rizzo, these nuggets, they start as nuggets and they turn into these beautiful flowers of conversation.
That's just what I do. I'm the lotus flower.
That's right. So, that's not imagery I created for myself with the word nugget first. It almost sounds like you like someone pooping out flowers. But you know what? That's you from now on, Rizzo. You poop flowers. You should hashtag that, folks. Get at Amanda Rizzo on Instagram with you poop flowers. And I'm my thoughts are that maybe we leave it there, folks. What do you guys think? Anything else we want to talk about or say?
Sounds good. I feel complete.
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation. So, and like I said, I've learned a lot. I got my little manual here that will help me in future times when I need to use it.
Cosign, 100%. And we'll be selling that for $9.99 on the 3D Muscle Journey website next summer, alongside Jeff's cookbook with crispy egg whites. No, but in all seriousness, I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you guys. Amanda, Brad, this is a great conversation. It's funny, just a little look behind the curtain of Oz here. We had no idea what this podcast was going to be on.
We didn't.
The only person who brought a topic to the table was Andrea, and we were all like, I don't know about those. And she was like, okay, well, what other ideas do you guys have? And we were like, I don't have ideas. Just give me something. So we were floundering, but we got here eventually, folks, and it turned out to be like 10 times better than I thought it might be. So, yeah, this will be one of my favorites. Hopefully you like it as well, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.